It's a compliment. Shouldn't students feel free to compare math learning strategies without risking the wrath of the PC police? Shouldn't we live in a world where comedians no longer sit back and tell us, no, we can't work the comic serpent anymore because free speech isn't permitted there? What exactly has happened in our colleges and universities that now we're going to sit back and let these morons control the conversations there too? These are the same people that fought for the ability to have this speech on campus, and now because ideas that they don't agree with are the ones that are being brought forth, they want to squash it. They want to go back to the days before because they're in control now. They're the ones in charge. They're the ones who, they're not fighting the system anymore. They are the system. And they want to make sure they continue to control it. And mark my words, remember what I said. We have seen it before. First, they ban words. The N-word mean anything to anyone? First, they ban words. You can't even say it. Unless, of course, you're part of a privileged class. Then, they start banning phrases. That's this step right here. And it's not just at UC Berkly. It's across the entire UC system. How long, once they've banned the phrases, the ideas, do they start banning books that might contain these phrases and these ideas? We've already seen that too. How many school libraries still have a copy of Huck Finn? How many people have watched The Adventures of Tom Sawyer on Netflix, a little cartoon version they had, to see that it has been edited? And I'm not opposed to editing the cartoon for the purposes of the exposure to the children. But the bottom line is, when you want to study the books, when you're offended by a certain thing, why ban it completely? If you want to say, all right, these kids are too young to understand, so we won't let them read it. Okay, I can maybe buy into that in certain circumstances. Maybe. But by the time I'm a junior in high school, if I'm not capable of handling the idea of reading N-word Jim and understanding that the connotation there isn't even a negative one. It was just a sign of what the times were like. Then there's a bigger, more deep-seated problem with the education that I've received at that point, that banning a book and banning a phrase isn't going to fix. And I might add that this is a word that's been hijacked, by the way. The N-word. Because there are N-words of every color, every size, every shape. It's not a black thing. It's a reference to someone that was deemed useless, lazy, and of low moral stature. The fact that certain people started using it in a different fashion and thereby insisted that they had changed the definition, it doesn't make a difference. It's a word that's got hijacked. Used in context, it's no more racist than the Confederate flag is, which people insist on seeing racism there. The time has come for us to wake up, folks. This is about censorship. This is about freedom of speech. This is about freedom of religion. This is about the limits of the Constitution and how things were laid out. Now, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to get into the main crux, because America is now fundamentally transformed. Barack Obama has kept his campaign promise, and we're going to look at how that is the case when we come back. So stay with me, and we'll be right back.
Turned out that I really don't know how to have love, how to let love go. Fell into a really bad place, saying what we can so that we feel safe. Woke up on the floor. Time begs for more. She says I'm jaded, but I would hate it if she thought any other way. Coming closer, call you a lover.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Thanks for staying with us, and it is time to delve into today's primary topics. America is now fundamentally transformed. It's happened. It's done. Now, it doesn't have to stay that way, and that's the other thing that a lot of people are missing. But at this point in time, and it didn't just happen over this past week, but this past week, they made it very clear and very obvious that they all, and in this case, when I say they all, I'm referring to every person that has an office in the United States government. They all believe that the Constitution no longer constrains them, including the Supreme Court, who, if the Constitution no longer constrains our government, there's no reason to have a Supreme Court or any of the federal courts. There's not a reason for it. Because the whole purpose of the Supreme Court is to serve as a check and balance against the other two branches. They're all supposed to be equal, and they all have enumerated responsibilities. The court is supposed to be non-political. That's why the appointments were made lifetime. The idea was that people of good character and good sound judgment would understand their role has to be non-political. And by being appointed to a lifetime position, they didn't have to worry about pleasing who the next president might be. And they didn't have to worry about pleasing who the next Speaker of the House might be, or who the next Majority Leader of the Senate might be. They didn't even have to worry about pleasing the majority of the American citizens, because they knew there would be times when the populace would be wrong on an issue. That it would be a knee-jerk reaction that would occur, and it would be up to the Supreme Court to apply reason and the letter of the law to prevent knee-jerk reactions from becoming dangerous legislation. Well, we've seen that the Supreme Court no longer plays that responsibility, and we've even seen members of the court call the court out on this past week. I don't think I have ever read dissents so well thought out, so well worded, and still have so much venom towards the decision, not because of the decision itself, but because of how the other justices carried out getting there. You've heard me say there's four branches of the government now. Two of them are unelected. One of them is the Supreme Court. The other is the bureaucracy. Now, again, this has been something that's been building. It didn't just happen yesterday. It didn't just happen this past week. It's been happening over a period of time, and the progressives have been creating this more so than others. But we know that the EPA now, they establish regulations and it has the power of law. Why? Because the legislator never challenges it. The court system never steps up and say, this is not a law. So we have the bureaucracy, people who are appointed, people who serve at the leisure or the pleasure of the president. Technically, the bureaucracy as a whole tends to fall under the executive branch, but it's become a branch into itself. Because we have seen carryover members of the bureaucracy from one administration to the next, regardless of political affiliation, and we have seen them continue to act as if they have the power to create law. And we've seen the other legitimate branches of our government act as if they have the authority to create law. They do not. Not under our Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't even afford a constitutional existence for the bureaucracy as it's been created. Our Constitution is a listing of negative rights, and it's not a listing of negative rights for the individuals or for the states. It's a listing of negative rights specifically for our federal government. It was constraints. It was a way to keep them from overstepping, overreaching, and eventually becoming tyrannical. They believed that we would always be men and women of honor, that we would always be men and women of moral fortitude, and they believed that we would always be keeping one eye on what our government was doing while we were taking care of our lives with the other. They believed this because they just came out of a war that by rights they should have never been able to win. But they gambled their very existence, their lives, their sacred honor, and certainly their fortunes on taking on one of the world's superpowers at the time. And through the grace of God and with a little bit of help from the French, we did exactly what we needed to do, and we won our independence from Great Britain. And then the great experiment with liberty was begun. Those men, the founders and the framers, believed in honor, they believed in duty, and they believed in a higher moral standard that we held ourselves to. And they thought that even when individual men garnered an office and became corrupt, that the American public would be the deciding factor in preventing them from being able to become tyrannical. They fully expected and anticipated American citizens to be paying close enough attention to know when their rights were being infringed upon, let alone being flat out taken away. And they expected the American public not only to pay attention to that fact, but to raise up and to make a stand. Whether that was at the ballot box, whether that was at the office of said elected official to make sure that something happened, or if need be, and they said it time and time again, and I'm certainly not calling for this, I'm not encouraging this, but they did believe that it was fully within the rights and responsibilities of the American citizen to take up arms if necessary. Because that's how we got our independence. Again, I mentioned the fact that there was a tremendous argument on whether or not to even have a Bill of Rights, because they never, ever wanted anybody to say that, well, those are the rights you have. Because the Constitution isn't the grantor of rights. The Constitution was simply meant to limit the power of the federal government. In fact, it says explicitly that any power not listed therein is a power that belongs to the citizens or to the state, respectively. So the bureaucracy